Born Elizabeth Jane Cochran to parents Mary Jane Cochran and Michael Cochran on May 5, 1864, Nellie Bly was always an adventurous girl. Her father was a wealthy judge and landowner, but when he passed months after Nellie's 6th birthday, her mother was left with 5 children and no way to support them. Although she was born wealthy, she grew up with no money and plenty of struggles. This experience likely led to her strong support of the lower classes and her lifelong career of advocacy for those with non-assertion. At the age of 15, Bly enrolled in a small college in Indiana, Pennsylvania, named the Indiana Normal School. Despite her education and willingness to work hard, she struggled to find a job. Nellie Bly, who truly used her pen as a sword, was deeply angered by an article published in the Pennsylvania Dispatch. The article, entitled "What Women Are Good For," discussed the few things women could do, and evaded the possibility of infanticide of most females. Bly responded with her letter to the editor of Pittsburgh Dispatch, which he then published. The girl puzzle was so impressive that the editor hired Bly, who was still going by Elizabeth Jane Cochran, for $5 per week. However, she felt very minimized at her new job, and in 1887 began writing for the New York World, where she would make her career in journalism. 111 of the patients at lunatic asylum died during 1 year alone. 3 of them passed due to suicide. This reflects the awful conditions of not just Blackwell's Island, but those across the country as well. Treatment was horrendous and did nothing except make conditions worse. Food was spoiled and infested with maggots, and in a time when little was known about mental illnesses, doctors were unsure of how to treat them.
The stigmas that I see associated with it are typically that people think that you're crazy, or that it's something that can be within one's control, which is not the case. I think some people still see mental illness as like they used to way back in the days when if someone was depressed or acted a little differently or had, psychosis, there weren't the treatments available that are now, and so they would be kind of just put away into an asylum or something with the wrong, inappropriate care, but at the time they didn't know any better.
On September 22nd of 1887, Bly was assigned her first major mission, leading to the start of her astronomical impact. Her editor, also working at World, gave her the job of going to a mental asylum nearby. To her surprise, she was asked to go undercover as a mentally ill woman to get committed into the Blackwell's Lunatic Asylum for Women. She knew this would be no small task, but Nellie Bly was determined to get the job done. She began this mission by getting used to acting insane in her home, then began showing her best act of insanity in public, drawing much needed attention to her. In Nellie Bly's book called 10 Days in a Madhouse, she states, "I knew if once I made a house full of women believe me crazy, that they would never rest until I was out of their reach and in secure quarters." She paid her way into the women's temporary house, where she was noticed for her so-called crazy traits. After noticing Nellie Bly's insanity, the police took her with them. She was given a trial to determine if she was mentally unsound. However, she was almost caught when the judge noticed something different about her. After staying at a temporary women's asylum, she was taken by boat to Blackwell's Island. After being committed to the asylum, even though she was perfectly sane, Bly was even more shocked by the way in which the patients lived. On her first day there, Bly faced such trauma that we today would consider inhumane and completely illegal. For instance, the food was said to be so horrible that one could not eat it. Even though the food was practically non-edible, patients still forced it down. Many of them were still left starving, with barely enough strength to make it through the day. As she continued her night, she and the rest of the patients were forced to take baths, in which freezing water was poured on them while the rest of the patients were made to stand and watch. Bly wrote, "My teeth shattered and my limbs were goose-fleshed and blue with cold. Suddenly, I got one after the other, 3 buckets of water over my head, ice-cold water too, into my eyes, my ears, my nose, my mouth." The lack of care that the doctors and nurses felt towards patients even worsened the horrible conditions. Many of the doctors who were supposed to diagnose those with mental illnesses had little experience and knowledge on what was actually happening. They frequently misdiagnosed people who were then forced to live in insane asylums for the rest of their lives. Bly noticed that many of the doctors ignored patients pleased to leave the asylum or to be retested in order to prove they were sane. Nurses frequently abused patients, knowing that they would never be caught or punished. Additionally, Nellie Bly exposed many of the safety concerns that she found inside the public institutions. Bly mentioned to one doctor that listened to her how hard it would be for patients to escape in case of a fire, which would be impossible for all but a few. When thinking about what would happen if there were to be a fire, Bly explained, "As I say, in case of a fire, not a dozen women could escape. All would be left to roast to death. Even if the nurses are kind, which they are not, it would require more presence of mind than women of their class possesses to risk the flames in their own lives while they unlock the 100 doors for the insane prisoners. Unless there is a change, there will someday be a tale of horror never equaled." After a long and horrendous 10 days in the asylum, Nellie Bly had gathered enough information. Although her editor was unsure of how to get her out, a lawyer was sent from the New York World pulling Bly out of the asylum. Bly's hearing experience inside the asylum was published along with illustrations on October 10, 1887, in the New York World. This was one of the most read magazines, which meant that almost all of New York had read Behind Asylum Bars in one day alone. Readers were horrified and astonished to find out what was really happening in the asylums, which during the late 1800s were thought to be places of calm and serenity. Some tourists even went to lunatic asylums just to walk the winding nature trails, which they believed represented the inside of the hospital as well. The patients, on the other hand, rarely got to walk outside, and on the rare occasion when they did, they were controlled and monitored like a pack of dogs. In her book, 10 Days in a Madhouse, Bly wrote, "I looked at the pretty lawns, which I thought was such a comfort to the poor creatures confined on the island, and laughed at my own notions. What enjoyment it is to them! They are not allowed on the grass, it is only to look at." The notion she previously felt so content with had been proven false. This reflects what many Americans had thought about the conditions of the asylums, and after reading her revolutionary articles, many laughed at their thoughts as well. This was just one of the reasons that the readers of Behind Asylum Bars were outraged and demanded action from the government and even explanations from those who ran the asylums, especially the doctors and nurses on Blackwell's Island. After the vital attention and recognition Nellie Bly was given, following a donation from the New York legal system, Blackwell Island's budget increased by $1 million. This was to fund beneficial changes to the asylum, relating to the better treatment of patients and the condition in which they lived in. Nellie Bly did not only promote changes to Blackwell's lunatic asylum, or even just New York. Advancements were made around the nation. The Binghamton, New York Insane Asylum made many advancements since Nellie Bly's investigation, most clearly shown on the exterior of the building. Nellie Bly is one of the most important pioneers in the history of the mental health field, and many of the improvements have been a result of her work. Today, mental institutions are much cleaner, better funded, and overall safer places than they used to be. Instead of committing someone often for life, hospitals today are focused on helping the patients as effectively as they can, but also getting them home to a more comfortable and beneficial environment as fast as possible. Additionally, psychiatric hospitals are usually filled with people who willingly choose to be there. While it is still possible to be committed to a hospital involuntarily, the process is much more rigorous and requires more proof than what Nellie Bly experienced in the 1800s. While the world still has a long way to go, it has grown exponentially since Nellie Bly shook the world with her articles. Since Bly's undercover investigation, people have begun to recognize Nellie Bly as many monumental changes have occurred. Plays have been performed, stories have been published, and movies have been made, all relating to and showing the world what Nellie Bly did for mental health.
Poor girl was found wandering the streets of New York, confused and disoriented. When she was found, she had complete amnesia. They sent her here to us.
Nellie's memories still exist. They're just cloaked.
Immediately after her investigation, the world noticed, asylums changed, conditions changed, and to this day, Nellie Bly is still recognized for her heroic acts.
Nellie Bly.